She signed a marriage contract to save her brother, but she never knew the mafia boss had chosen her years before. Emma thought her marriage to James Hawke was a clean arrangement, legal, temporary, emotionless. Separate rooms, separate lives, no questions about his business. But when Victor Crane called her private phone, everything shattered. James hadn't just married her because of her brother's debt. He had bought that debt 2 years earlier, before she ever met him, because another man had already marked her as collateral. Let us break down exactly how this disastrous scene kicks off, drenched in the absolute worst kind of cheap arrogance. Listen to Ryan Calloway throwing his voice across this dead quiet art gallery. The man is a textbook narcissist, wrapping his calculated cruelty in fake pity. But look closely at Emma Miller. She does not even flinch. You and I are going to unpack this together, because the plot twist hiding in this room is wild. She lets this clown keep his pathetic illusion of control, fully knowing she already traded one basic monster for a literal final boss. Her secret husband, James Hawke, is an apex predator. Stick with me through this. The harsh reality is, sometimes the familiar devil you know is child's play compared to the terrifying demon you actually choose to marry. The exact second Ryan decides to publicly humiliate the woman he once broke, this fool unknowingly signs his own death warrant. The lighting in this fancy gallery frames Emma in suffocating isolation. She showed up solo, wearing a dark red dress that seems to swallow the soft glow of the room. This is not some desperate cry for attention. It is a brutal exercise in simply trying to exist in a space where she cannot hide anymore. She stands near the cold edge of the room, grounding her racing thoughts against the icy glass of a champagne flute. Her polished mask holds up flawlessly, right until the harsh sound of her toxic ex shatters her fragile peace. We all wear masks to survive our worst days, but the absolute heaviest ones are always the ones we force ourselves to wear, just to feel safe. 2 simple words hang completely frozen in the stagnant air. Emma Miller. Notice how her strength goes totally rigid in that exact moment, locking her body into a posture of pure defense. She pulls off a slow, painfully deliberate turn. Barely 12 feet away stands Ryan, wearing a smirk so incredibly predatory it turns your stomach. It is the exact same look she once tragically confused with love, now exposed as the empty tool of a parasite. When she finally speaks his name, her voice is completely dead. He closes the distance with the insane arrogance of a man who has never faced a single consequence in his entire life. He looks her up and down like a discarded toy. It is a quiet reminder that people who only treat you as an object will simply never recognize your true, beautiful humanity. He tells her she looks different, chasing those toxic words with a laugh perfectly engineered to throw her off balance. He stops right at the edge of her personal space. It is a calculated invasion, designed to suffocate her while he plays the nice guy. He starts digging into her life, asking about her vanished career with the infuriating nod of a man only pretending to listen. When he presses for details, she gives him absolutely nothing he can use against her. Handing the terrifying truth of her new reality to a man like Ryan would be a fatal mistake. He is blind to the fact that she had to forge herself into cold steel just to survive him. It is a harsh truth. I crossed the street, grabbed his shirt, but we often have to harden our own hearts into iron just to protect what little peace we have finally managed to build. Stick with me here, because this is exactly where the quiet mind games reach a boiling point. Watch Emma analyze his face, tracking the same abusive math he always used to tear her down. He is weighing her quiet elegance against his pathetic fantasy of her ruin. He points out she is alone, wrapping his surgical cruelty in a sick mask of casual concern. Then comes that slight, dismissing shrug. It is a masterclass in passive aggression, meant to crush her spirit without leaving a visible bruise. He uses their time apart like a knife, hinting her loneliness is a fatal flaw. He cannot fathom that her isolation is actually the heavy price of a profound rebirth. Listen, true personal growth almost always requires us to stay completely alone in the dark before we can finally walk into the light. lets a heavy silence pass before dropping a smirking comment that she should have found a replacement by now. The glass in Emma's grip turns into absolute ice as the edges of her vision blur into darkness. Her entire universe shrinks down to the agonizing 6 inches, separating her from the man who promised her forever, right before destroying her life. Ryan drops his voice into a fake, intimate whisper, weaponizing her own trauma against her. He claims he worries about her walls being way too high. Emma just stares back, her body unnervingly still. That kind of stillness is never peace. It is the breathless terror of a hunted creature hoping the shadows hide it. Deep trauma does not just magically fade away. It simply learns to hold its breath when the predator walks back into the room. Burying every emotion is a brutal but necessary armor when your mind has already survived a total collapse. She flips the script on him and asks about his new partner, dropping the question with the freezing precision of a surgical scalpel. The smug look on Ryan's face instantly dims as his fake smile completely derails. He spits out a defensive syllable, claiming everything is fine, but Emma catches the microscopic twitch in his jaw. It is a tiny fracture in his perfect armor. Armed with that pathetic truth, she steps back to make a clean escape. But his voice hooks her one last time. He breathes her name with a soft, desperate inflection that pulls at her old wounds. The absolute hardest part is finally forgiving yourself for still hearing the ghost of the person who broke you. He shatters her boundary line again, invading her space until the scent of his cologne fills her lungs. It is the exact stuff she bought him in another lifetime, lingering like a cruel ghost. He tries to rewrite their ugly history, whispering she deserved a softer landing when they fell apart. He puts on his mask of empathy, pretending to wish her well. But as Emma looks at him now, the blinding lights of her old affection are finally switched off. She sees him with perfect clarity. He is nothing but a fragile, predictable man starving for a reaction. You and I might be wondering the exact same thing here. How do we give so much power to someone so incredibly small? The the monster who ruined your life is just an ordinary, deeply broken person. She lets the hammer drop, letting the truth slip from her lips in a quiet breath. I am married. The suffocating silence that crashes down between them is a cinematic masterpiece. Ryan's face becomes a literal battleground. You can watch him cycle from pure shock to desperate denial before settling into raw, pathetic agony. She watches that tiny flicker of pain and buries it in the coldest vault of her heart. He chokes on his words, demanding to know when it happened. 7 months ago, she whispers. He scrambles for his footing, eyes darting around the gallery to see if this unseen husband is in the room. But before Emma can even answer, the air in the gallery grows unbearably heavy. Sometimes, a single devastating truth has the power to pull absolutely all the oxygen out of a room. A true apex predator never needs to announce their arrival. The second Jaws-hawk crosses that threshold, the collective pulse of the gallery violently staggers. The buzz of conversation completely fractures and dies. It is a primal instinct to hold your breath when a terrifying shadow falls over your throat. Emma feels this chilling shift long before she even turns her head. James stands framed in the doorway, wearing a flawless dark suit, his eyes looking like sheets of freezing winter water. He does not just enter a space, he completely consumes it. He moves forward with the terrifying, unhurried grace of a gathering hurricane. True power never has to raise its voice under tension. It simply walks into the room and waits for everyone else to fall completely silent. The 2 enforcers, flanking him, look like they were carved out of solid concrete. They move with lethal precision to isolate the perimeter, operating on a violent frequency these wealthy snobs cannot comprehend. It takes James exactly 4 seconds to find his wife in the crowd. His dead, oceanic gaze locks onto Emma, flicks over to evaluate the pathetic shape of Ryan, and snaps right back to her. It is a terrifying download of pure information in a single glance. Over 7 months of terrifying captivity, Emma learned that his briefest look carries the deadly weight of a loaded gun. A deep vibration against her palm confirms he is always watching her. He is often invisible. Prison for another, falsely believing that a stronger warden will keep us safe from the monsters outside. Do not react to my presence. It is a suffocating command, built on absolute, terrifying control. She forces her body to remain frozen as he parts this wealthy crowd like dark water. His approach is a terrifying inevitability. He moves with the heavy, inescapable pull of a midnight tide. When he finally reaches her, his hand slides to the small of her back, applying a microscopic, burning pressure. From any normal husband, this would be a sweet touch of romance. But from James, it is a searing, territorial brand on his property. He murmurs that she is carrying tension, his dark voice vibrating at a frequency only she can hear. Listen to me here. When we surrender our autonomy out of fear, even a gentle touch becomes a heavy chain, reminding us exactly who holds the keys to our cage. Listen closely, because tonight you and I are stepping straight into the quiet, terrifying center of the storm. James stands there, practically vibrating with this cold, brutal energy. His icy eyes scan the wealthy room like a wolf, circling the edge of a dying fire. Before Emma can even push out a warning breath, Ryan crashes the moment, running purely on unearned confidence. He ignores every primal alarm bell going off in his own head. Feeling threatened by the heavy, suffocating shadow James casts, Ryan actually walks right up and sticks his hand out to a literal monster. He introduces himself with this hollow swagger, totally blind to the danger. Life has a very cruel way of checking our delusions. Never mistake your desperate cluelessness for a bulletproof vest. Picture those harsh gallery lights, throwing jagged shadows across the cold marble floor. Ryan just leaves his hand hanging out there. It is a painfully ordinary gesture, yet he is completely blind to the reality that he is offering it to an absolute predator. James does not flinch. His dead eyes track down to those shaking fingers, studying them the way a medical examiner looks over a grim piece of evidence. The silence stretches out, heavy and suffocating, sounding exactly like a massive steel vault slamming shut forever. When he finally opens his mouth, his voice is a flat, terrifying whisper, casually dropping that he already knows exactly who Ryan is. The outstretched arm falls away. Remember, true power never has to scream, to make you feel completely helpless. Emma leaves her past hanging out to dry, offering absolutely zero emotional backup. She stands there frozen in the dim light, giving us a textbook example of a deep trauma response. She instinctively throws her survival instinct behind her captor, totally abandoning whatever history she used to share with Ryan. The poor guy stutters as the brutal truth absolutely wrecks his fragile ego. He finally puts it together. James is her husband. You can actually see the blood drain from his face as the reality hits him like a freight train. The panic in his wide eyes is pure agony. He realizes the girl he spent 2 years pitying is now chained to a ruthless mob boss. James just stands there, radiating pure menace. Never assume you understand the locked cages other people willingly step into. Ryan is left completely ripped apart, on the floor of his own pride. His slick social armor is totally gone, making this quiet verbal beatdown an absolute tragedy to witness. James hits him with the most clinical dismissal imaginable, thanking the man for his trafficking, with the freezing cold energy of a warden ending visiting hours. Turning to Emma, his gray eyes flash a silent command that she does not even try to fight. He calmly states that they have somewhere to be. It is absolutely not a request. It is a straight command wrapped up in expensive manners. They head for the side exit, her heels clicking a fast, nervous rhythm. James drops his hand, leaving exactly 6 inches of freezing space between them. Sometimes the most brutal prisons are built from invisible boundaries we accept. Let us zero in on that physical gap. It is just 6 deliberate inches of space, but it carries the crushing weight of 7 brutal months of isolation. They walk like getting any closer would trigger a lethal shock, which is typical for bonds held together by pure fear. Once they hit the dark hallway, safely away from the nosy crowd, Emma speaks up. She demands to know how he knew her past. James does not blink. he hits her with an unblinking, dead stare. A top-tier manipulator never breaks eye contact when dropping a cold fact or hiding a massive truth. Emma is totally haunted by that gaze, feeling the terrifying blur between honesty and total control. It is a very rough lesson, but a predator's raw honesty will wreck you just as fast as their biggest, darkest lies. His comeback is a hollow echo, an empty flex of time with zero real substance. Emma clenches her jaw in the dim light and fires back that his excuse is complete garbage. People trapped in these psychological cages learn very fast how useless it is to ask questions when the awful truth is already carved into their bones. She puts the twisted puzzle together, realizing he rigged the entire guest list just to crash the event. A tiny expression flashes across his face, a rare slip of his iron grip that vanishes in a split second. She talks about how Ryan looked at her with pathetic pity, treating her like trash, left on the curb. Here is a major reality check for you. Real isolation does not just hide you from the world, it completely warps how you see your own worth and reflection. She brings up the public humiliation, her voice shaking as she goes on about how Ryan questioned her status, while the elite watched like circling vultures. She insists she had the mess handled before James decided to swoop in, searching his blank face for any clue. She drops the dangerous question. Why was he actually there? James Hawk has the chilling vibe of a guy who could order a hit while casually sipping his morning coffee. Over 7 agonizing months, Emma has built up the hyper-awareness of a literal hostage. She translates the dark gaps in his silence, reading his breathing just to stay alive. Now, she uncovers a terrifying motive she is completely unprepared for. Remember, sometimes the answers we chase are way more dangerous than the questions we ask. Stick with me here, because this is the exact moment the psychological game completely flips on its head. He casually states he just wanted to be there. No master plan, no manipulative build-up, just a raw, unhinged admission, handed over like a loaded gun. The simplicity of it hits her nervous system like a lightning strike. Emma freezes in the hallway, running through the cold contract she signed 7 months ago. That arrangement was supposed to be completely sterile and business only. Now, that fake reality is violently shattering. She suggests they get out of there, trying to keep a cool face while her racing pulse gives her away. He agrees with the same chilling calm. The most dangerous move a mastermind can pull is giving you a real glimpse of what they actually want. As they head out to the street, that 6-inch gap stays between them, humming like a charged electric fence. Emma stares straight ahead at the glass doors. A crushing dread settles deep in her chest, making her realize she is absolutely boxed in. She is not trapped by Ryan and his pathetic attitude. She has way too much social armor for that noise. The real boss-level threat is the man in the sharp suit walking right next to her. This guy uses his own restraint as a weapon and drops a confession of dark desire like they are chatting about the weather. Back inside, Ryan is still frozen, choking on the fact that his whole idea of Emma has been destroyed. Holding on to an outdated version of someone will leave you totally wrecked when you finally see who they have become today. Ryan is out here living in total ignorance of the brutal reality. He has zero clue what James actually does in the shadows, the massive criminal empire he runs, or why all those rich snobs bowed down the second he walked in. As the freezing night air hits Emma and they walk up to the blacked-out car, she accepts a dark truth. Complete ignorance is the only shield Ryan has left, and she prays he stays blind. Once inside the ride, the vibe gets incredibly heavy. This is not some relaxed silence between a normal couple. This is the suffocating vacuum of 2 people who's spent 7 months dodging the massive, dangerous elephant in the room. Buried secrets and unspoken words will always weigh much heavier and cut way deeper than any physical chains ever could. They sit stiff on opposite sides of the expensive leather seats, the physical gap perfectly mirroring their massive emotional walls. Street lights bleed through the tinted glass, flashing across their silent faces. Then the driver, Marcus, completely shatters the agonizing tension. Enablers like him know exactly when a casual comment will blow up a fragile situation. He brings up the Calloway mess without checking the mirror. James shuts him down instantly, but the bomb has already gone off. That phrase hits Emma in the chest, burning like a deep infection. She repeats the sterile words, her tone totally dead. James turns his head just an inch, coldly confirming that Ryan is officially a situation. Ignoring a problem never makes it vanish. It just hands someone else the power to rewrite your reality. You and I have seen how pathological control loves to disguise itself as protection. Emma spins around in the dim back seat to face him head-on. She knows the only way to crack a mastermind is to block every excuse he uses, to dodge questions. She corners him. He knew about her ex before he stepped into that gallery. Her brain clicks into pure survival logic. She asks the heavy question, demanding to know if he has been having her followed. The 3 seconds of dead silence that fill the car are absolutely deafening. Hesitation from a ruthless calculator, like Hawk, is basically a signed confession. He slowly admits to having personnel keeping an eye on things, using this chilling corporate spin. True safety should never force you to hand over your basic freedom. Let us ride along in the suffocating quiet of that black sedan tonight. Emma lets a chilling accusation hang in the heavy air. She tells him straight it was an art gallery, and her ex-fiancé miraculously appeared, invited by his shadowy contacts. The cold calculation freezes the blood. James barely blinks, his face carved from ice as he insists this is highly relevant information. Emma snaps, demanding to know who exactly finds it relevant. He stares with bottomless gray eyes, murmuring that it matters to him. She digs shaking fingers into her knee, fighting off a total collapse of her nerves. She refuses to give him a screaming match in a moving vehicle. It teaches us something true. Sometimes preserving your dignity means choosing exactly when and where you wage your wars. The tension of the night hits like a sudden freeze. Emma demands they take this bitter showdown inside. She is done with the polite corporate jargon. She wants the raw truth right now. A dark shadow crosses his face. The exhaustion of decoding this dangerous man is breaking her spirit. They pull up to his massive brownstone. Think back to how she arrived here 7 months ago, gripping her suitcase, and that contract like she was stepping into a bear trap. That sickening feeling of being an intruder never faded. The moment they step into the foyer, she drops her bag and spins to face him, before the heavy door even clicks shut. It leaves us with a brutal truth to swallow. You can never build a safe, warm home when your foundation rests entirely on a massive compromise. Let us unpack this heavy moment together. Emma stands in the dim room, her voice shaking as she demands to know how long he has been tracking her. James slides off his dark jacket, folding it with the terrifying, quiet grace of a wolf. He completely rejects the word watching. The shadows catch his sharp jaw as he calls it being aware, twisting his toxic control into a dark performance of devotion. His cold mask finally slips a fraction. He confesses that 3 weeks ago, an unknown person followed her from a coffee shop on 9th Avenue straight to their front door. It is a blinding warning sign, and it teaches us something painful to accept. True betrayal almost always sneaks into your life, wearing the warm, comforting mask of absolute protection. Listen closely to the freezing reality of her cage. James leans casually against his heavy mahogany desk and flatly states the stalker returned yesterday. But his men erased the problem entirely. All the breath leaves Emma's lungs. Her posture goes rigid. When she forces out a whisper, demanding a name, his lips tighten. He brushes away a human life like a casual business matter. Emma's voice cracks, fracturing under the crushing weight of her denial, shattering. She spent long months ignoring the toxic rot hidden in the floorboards, and now the house is crashing down. The tragic truth of life is inescapable here. You can only ignore the dark monster sleeping in your own home until the exact second you finally hear that heavy deadbolt click shut. Emma's trembling fingers press into the cold glass table. She is a drowning woman clinging to her last lifeboat, the strict boundaries of their contract. Her voice shakes as she reminds this ruthless man she never agreed to be managed. The room grows heavy as James takes one slow step forward, radiating the deadly stillness of a lion about to strike. Looking down with pure ice in his eyes, he shatters her fragile illusion. He quietly tells her that the exact second her pen signed that paper, her entire existence belonged to his dark underworld. He exhales a calculated sigh and offers a hollow apology. The bitter lesson here is undeniable. A true master of manipulation will gladly sacrifice a tiny pawn if it buys them absolute control over the board. His deep voice echoes in the quiet study, claiming she deserved to know the full extent of his security. The words hit her like freezing rain. She swallows hard, forcing the ultimate question into the open. She asks if he is secretly managing anything else. For one devastating fraction of a second, his dark eyes actually dart away. In the brutal language of underworld deception, welcome back to the midnight hour. Just listen to the heavy, suffocating quiet of that room, broken only by the steady tick of a clock that sounds exactly like a countdown to ruin. Emma stands there, her chin trembling as she asks for the whole truth, knowing the answer will burn their fragile world to ash. When James turns to her, the warm mask of the husband completely dissolves. Staring back is the cold, ruthless underworld king she tried so desperately to ignore for 7 months. It is a wild gravity pulling them into a tragic romance she feels in her very bones. Here is a hard truth about the human heart. Sometimes it carries a quiet willingness to fall deeply in love with the exact person designing its destruction. James leans in to answer her, but he stretches the silence just a second too long, letting the tension wrap tightly around her throat. Then, the sudden buzz of a phone shatters the moment. In a single breath, the gentle posture of a caring partner vanishes, replaced entirely by the cold stillness of a ruthless predator. His eyes go completely flat as he mutters something about taking the call. Emma whispers for him to go, her voice caught in a painful contradiction. She wants him to stay, and she absolutely hates herself for craving his warmth. He steps into the shadows of the study, and that heavy oak door clicks shut. Remember this, folks. No matter how perfectly we craft our masks, they will always slip. The very second our true, darkest nature demands our attention. Slipping through the thick door, his muffled voice carries the weight of violent consequences, casually discussing the timing of a hit. She was never meant to hear the bloody reality of his double life. Standing alone in the hallway, Emma presses the heels of her hands hard against her eyes, begging the pressure to stop her mind from falling apart. The crushing truth settles in. She is nothing more than a tiny pawn on his invisible chessboard. Watch her ghost walk into the kitchen. The loud hiss of boiling water becomes her only anchor as she pours tea, trying to stitch her shattered reality together. Here is a quiet life lesson for you. When tossed into an ocean of chaos, our fragile minds will always try to build a desperate raft out of the most ordinary routines. Let us rewind and look at the real architect of this misery. Enter Daniel, her older brother. He rolls in with that slick, hollow charm, possessing the terrifying ability to drop life-ruining news like he is chatting about the weather. It is this same dead stare he used years ago to tell her their father died. 18 months ago, Daniel used that flat tone to confess to a mountain of underground debt. The violent men, holding his markers, did not want his worthless life. They demanded Emma as living collateral. The tragedy of family is a bitter pill to swallow. The lesson here is chilling, but true. The real monsters that destroy our peace are rarely strangers waiting in an alley. They are usually invited right through the front door by our own toxic blood. Collateral. The word hangs in the air like a death sentence. Imagine Emma sitting paralyzed on her floor, watching the city blur past her window. Her rebuilt life turns to ash. As Daniel coldly explains, she must marry a literal monster to survive. The target is James Hawke. In the underworld, just breathing his name brings the dead quiet of a graveyard. He is an apex predator wrapped in custom Italian silk, running a dark syndicate while smiling for the news. He hides his ruthless nature behind a shiny hospital wing bearing his name, It is the ultimate camouflage. This leaves us with a vital life lesson. The most dangerous predators never hide in the shadows. They hide their cruelty right out in the open, perfectly shielded by extreme wealth and the fake glow of public charity. Stay close to the radio tonight, because this is the exact moment the floor falls out. We are watching the terrifying double life of James Hawke. 1 hour he offers a brilliant smile at a charity dinner, and by midnight, there are quiet whispers of blood on marble floors. Emma paces the room like a cornered animal, demanding to know why a king of thieves would ever claim her. Her brother dismisses it as a simple favor. For 3 grueling days, pure survival buries her terror. She drafts as a desperate contract, marching into his glass office like a soldier of ice to demand clear boundaries. But the hard truth of life is that you can never build a sturdy fortress out of paper to negotiate with a very earthquake that is already swallowing your world. Picture the freezing air inside that massive glass conference room. Emma sits straight across from the devil himself, sliding her typed demands across the polished wood. She is desperate to prove she still owns a piece of her own soul. But James does not even blink. He sits there radiating a terrifying quiet control, entirely ignoring her exit clause, because he knows she is never walking away. He slowly taps his pen against the single boundary she tried to set. The irony is suffocating to watch. Emma truly believes she is securing her freedom. Yet, here is a bitter lesson we all learn eventually. The heavy walls we build to keep the monsters out are almost always the same walls that lock us inside the dark with them. He just watches her, quietly amused by her self-made prison. James tilts his head, studying her with a chilling, quiet curiosity. He watches her like a man observing a moth beat against a window pane, dissecting her trauma in real time. Emma holds her chin high, demanding the fragile illusion of a normal existence. She wants to fade into a ghost, haunting his massive estate, untouched by the dirty money keeping her breathing. The silence between them stretches out, growing heavy until his deep baritone shatters the room. Ignorance is never a shield, he tells her. It is just the comforting lie we swallow to fall asleep. The raw truth of life has grabbed his shirt. The truth of life is that true safety never comes from squeezing your eyes shut in the dark. It only arrives when you finally find the courage to stare directly into the teeth of the beast. That cold realization washes over the room. His harsh words were never meant to offer comfort. They were a measured warning. Later, the oak door groans, throwing a long shadow across the floor as James steps inside. His jaw is locked tight, wearing a mask of impending violence. Sensing the tension in her shoulders, he announces he has to leave. When Emma demands real answers about the unseen threats, he freezes. In that agonizing stretch of quiet, he calculates exactly how much ugly truth her mind can take. Beneath the harsh lamp, the cracks in his iron armor finally show. We all wear armor, but the heaviest burden in life is pretending we are never exhausted. The crushing weight of holding a dark empire together is quietly under. The heavy toll of playing the apex predator is carved into the weary slope of his shoulders. He softly claims the situation is handled, but Emma refuses to back down. Her cup clicks sharply against the wood, and a massive shift occurs. She is entirely done waiting for a hero. She demands full access to his chaotic reality, begging for the truth about the stranger she married. James stands before her like a stone monument. He warns her, his voice low and raspy, that she will despise his answers. When she commands him to speak anyway, his immaculate facade shatters, letting a terrifying vulnerability bleed out. There is a deep lesson here. The most dangerous moment in any tragedy is never when you are pushed into the abyss, but when you willingly choose to walk into the dark. Let us step into this quiet room together, you and I, and watch how a trauma bond builds its tragic architecture. James flashes a rare look of defeat before turning his back. The heavy door seals shut with a sickening thud, leaving Emma frozen in the dim kitchen. Just look at how unnervingly still she remains. The terror of this house used to eat her alive, but survival is a ruthless teacher. It brings up a heartbreaking truth about human nature. Sometimes, You have to destroy your own innocence just to survive the monster sleeping down the hall. Fear requires a fragile heart, and she has turned hers into solid stone. Now, we drift into her memory, flashing back to a quiet threat from 3 weeks ago, and the dead, icy stare of his top enforcer, Marcus. Emma stands paralyzed, suffocating under the weight of this fabricated life. Her mind runs the same agonizing reel on a loop. She remembers the blinding lights at the gallery and the deafening silence right after James publicly claimed her as his property. She still clings to 5 tiny words he whispered in a hallway, surviving on absolute crumbs of affection designed to keep her on a leash. Suddenly, a harsh vibration shatters the quiet. Her phone lights up on the counter, throwing a ghostly glow over her shaking fingers. Unknown caller. She knows every secret number James uses. Her brain screams at her to walk away. But the hard truth of life is that we often chase familiar pain instead of stepping into unknown freedom. The invisible chain is simply too strong. With a trembling thumb, she accepts the call. A hollow voice slithers through these nor empty of human warmth. The stranger speaks with the calculated rhythm of a seasoned predator circling his prey. You can see Emma's pulse hammering in her throat, her knuckles turning bone white as she demands a name. The man smoothly paints himself as an old friend of her husband, his tone dripping with arrogant ease. He whispers that she is completely blind to the absolute monster she married. When she tries to push back, his counterattack is brutally precise. He casually drops the name of her brother, Daniel, framing him as a broken pawn in a massive game. It serves as a harsh reminder that the most dangerous enemies in life are usually the ones who speak to us with perfect manners. She sets her tea down, ordering him to never call again. The stranger maintains a sickeningly polite warmth, though every syllable drips with poison. He softly tells her to weigh his ugly words against the beautiful lies her husband feeds her. Then, a sharp click. The line goes dead. Emma stands frozen by the sink. Stick with me here, because you and I both know the absolute hardest lesson we ever learn is that control is strictly a temporary illusion. In mere seconds, her safe illusion has turned to dust. With panic rising in her chest, she dials her brother 3 times in a row. Finally, Daniel answers with a stiff, breathless greeting. It is the haunting sound of a broken man, staring at his ringing phone in total dread. Emma skips the pleasantries entirely. Her voice cuts through the air like shattered glass as she demands a name. Emma warns him the phantom caller knows every detail of his forced obedience. She locks her tone into a flat, dead monotone to keep from screaming. Listen, sometimes in life, going completely numb is the only way the human heart survives unbearable pain. She demands the name again. Through the speaker, she hears Daniel let out a jagged, weeping exhale. It is the terrible sound of a hunted animal, realizing there is nowhere left to hide. Barely whispering, he drops the name into the quiet room. Victor Crane, the architect of his ruin. Emma squeezes her eyes shut, embracing the dark to process the betrayal. Daniel starts babbling about shifting debts, but Emma cuts the noise. She drives the knife straight to the heart of the tragedy, asking if James knew. A terrified silence is her only answer. Her iron defenses finally crack, a tremor shaking her voice as she begs for the honest truth. Dan Bay breaks down weeping, confessing that James secretly bought his debt 2 whole years ago. Long before the wedding bells rang, her husband stole the advantage right from Crane, kicking off a vicious war over who owned her bloodline. Emma feels her spirit detach from her body. We look down at her bare feet on the freezing tiles. She has no memory of taking her shoes off, a haunting symptom of a fracturing mind. The bitter truth is that betrayal from those we love breaks our reality far worse than any enemy ever could. Standing in the shadows, she whispers the twisted timeline out loud. She calls upon the cold logic of her past life, mapping the edges of her beautiful cage from the inside out. She whispers this tragic timeline to the empty shadows ooze. 6 months after James purchased her brother's life, he slipped a diamond onto her finger, hiding the chains that bound them. Let us look closely at this, because the scale of the manipulation is staggering. She presses a hand against the counter, anchoring her spinning mind, and demands to know what Crane wants. Daniel S., voice withers into a whimper, admitting that Crane wants psychological control. A wave of disgust washes over Emma at her brother's cowardice. Crane knows she is living inside a fabricated dream. The painful lesson here is that the truth can easily be forged into a devastating weapon. His master plan is to hand her the painful reality and slowly mold her into a living blade against her own husband. Emma lets out a laugh so hollow it chills the room. She wonders if this rival boss forgot who she was, before this nightmare, a completely ruthless attorney. You and I are going to unpack this tragedy together. True power never actually dies. It only sleeps in the dark. Straightening her spine, she reclaims her strength by laying down brutal rules, commanding Daniel to cut all contact with Crane. When he chokes on terrified tears, her voice turns to absolute ice. She knows the violence heading their way. Hanging up, she stands frozen like a marble statue. For exactly 30 agonizing seconds, the tears fall, violently mourning a love that was entirely fake. It teaches us a vital lesson. True resilience in life is simply giving yourself a strict time limit to grieve before the real war begins. Picture the quiet agony of that room. For 30 seconds, Emma spirals into the dark. Her world has collapsed into dust, and she lets the pure heartbreak wreck her. Her shoulders shake as she mourns a beautifully toxic lie. But then, the hot tears stop. Her face hardens into an ice-cold mask of tragedy. She dials him, but the call drops to voicemail. Without hesitating, she punches in the doomsday emergency code. The line clicks, but it is Marcus, the soulless hitman. He tries to soothe her with empty excuses, but Emma refuses to bend. It proves a painful reality. Sometimes the only way to survive the devil is to stop playing his games. With terrifying precision, she orders him to warn his boss that Victor Crane just crossed the line right into her own home. Emma did not just give Marcus an order, she flipped the entire board. By setting a brutal deadline of 2 a.m, she proved she knew exactly who owned her brother's soul. She backed a monster into a corner, forcing him to swallow his pride. Dropping the phone, she sat alone in the pitch-black room, decoding Victor Crane's twisted mind. Crane saw her as the ultimate loaded weapon to fire at her husband. Tracing the timeline backwards, she uncovered the bloody debt that infected her marriage from the very first day. A memory flashes in her mind, a lavish dinner from their early days together. It was a stunning masquerade built entirely on carefully crafted lies. The harsh truth is undeniable. The most dangerous traps in life are always the ones beautifully disguised as a sweeping romance. Let us look at this piece by piece, shall we? Picture that dimly lit, incredibly tense dining room. Emma grilled him on why he picked her, knowing others offered far better strategic power. But you and I both know how this works. A top-tier predator never picks their prey by accident. James just sat there, slicing his steak with the terrifying grace of a man who uses time as a weapon. Slowly looking up, he brought up her obsession with their first contract. While others would blindly sign their souls away, she fought back and demanded strict terms. He stopped moving entirely, letting a suffocating silence drop over the table. The lesson here is deeply human. People never choose their partners by pure chance. They hunt for the exact mirror of their own unresolved inner wars. And Emma? She swallowed her pure terror and forged it into cold defiance. Back then, she lacked the vocabulary to understand his twisted obsession, so she buried every single red flag deep in her mind. But tonight, that mental wall is completely destroyed. The clock flashed 40 minutes past midnight as the perimeter alarm gave a soft chirp. James drifted into the dark kitchen, like a ghost, stopping dead in his tracks at the sight of her. She stood barefoot on the freezing tiles, gripping her phone like a loaded gun. Her jaw was locked tight, with a dangerous explosive fury she was always taught to suppress. Life often teaches us a terrifying truth. Fear can either crush us down into fine dust or forge us into absolute steel. Tonight, standing in the shadows, Emma was purely sharpened steel. The air grew suffocatingly thin as her interrogation began. She ordered him to sit, and wildly enough, the untouchable boss obeyed. His dark eyes locked onto her trembling frame, and that icy armor seemed to melt. Emma realized he had spent the drive home plotting exactly how to gaslight her wrath into quiet submission. "Stick with me here, because this is where their dynamic fractures forever." She dropped the name Victor Crane like a live grenade onto the cold marble counter. James barely flinched, offering only a single calculated nod. She traced out his sick lies, proving he manipulated her long before the wedding bells rang. The proud king leaned forward, faking a soft vulnerability. "It proves a simple, undeniable truth in life. No matter how deeply you try to bury a lie, the rain will eventually wash the dirt away." James tried to spin his dark deception as pure protection. He whispered that weaponized her brother against her. He justified his cruelty by acting like he was the only man allowed to use such brutal methods. It was pure arrogance from a man who believed he had the right to play God with her fate. Emma remained frozen. Her chest rose and fell in ragged breaths as the sheer scale of his betrayal finally crashed over her. "You made a choice for me," she whispered, digging her pale fingernails into the hard oak table. She saw right through his carefully constructed mask. He had decided he knew what was best, stripping away her free will without a second thought. Always remember this painful truth. Control dressed up as love is never actually love. It is just a beautifully decorated, incredibly lonely cage. She stared him down, exposing the rotting foundation of their short marriage. It was nothing but a relentless string of violent choices he had made in the dark. "Do you see why this is wrong? Even if you meant well," she demanded, her voice cracking. James nodded instantly, offering the smooth surrender of a man faking a soul. "Then explain this to me," she pushed back. "Who is Victor Crane? Tell me the actual truth, not the fake corporate spin." Outside, passing headlights sliced through the blinds, painting pale prison bars across his face. Mia ruled the eastern streets when James was 23. James used the older man's power to build his own empire, then brutally cut him loose. It teaches a very harsh life lesson. Blind ambition, without an ounce of loyalty, will always leave a terrible, tragic trail of blood. You and I have seen this exact kind of dark obsession before. It is the absolute refusal to let go of what you consider yours. In the shadows, James described their bloody fallout with dead eyes, casually listing the men and the money Crane lost. For 15 years, Crane waited patiently in the dark, desperate to snatch back his stolen crown. Her brother's debt was the spark to light the powder keg. James admitted that, if he had not trapped Emma first, Crane absolutely would have claimed her. Emma sank back into her chair, staring blankly at her trembling hands. Her mind twisted, trying to survive the sheer horror by imagining an even darker timeline, where a monster like Crane encountered instead. This is the tragic way the human mind tries to protect itself. We accept an unbearable present by convincing ourselves the alternative was fatal. Watch closely as she tries to claw back some scrap of power. Emma realized Crane only reached out because she was completely blind to her husband's true nature. The rival boss wanted the ugly truth to terrify her into switching teams. "Is there anything else in your past that would make me want to run to him?" she asked, her voice dangerously soft. A flicker of genuine shock crossed James's face. "Believe me, it is incredibly rare to catch the devil off guard. Honestly, I am not sure," he murmured, his dark gaze dropping to the floor. "Tell me everything," she ordered, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Give me the hard facts, and let me judge for myself." It breaks the heart to watch this tragedy unfold. The fragile illusion of having a choice is always the human soul's final, desperate defense against total, crushing despair. He did not give her Grab's shirt. He did not give her a dramatic, tearful confession. Pouring out his darkest sins at 1 a.m. would have broken her completely. Instead, he coldly mapped out the rotten architecture of his underworld empire. It was not some flashy genre cartel, but a quiet, bleeding infection hidden behind legitimate corporate walls. He spoke with the hollow, terrifying calmness of a man who stopped pretending to have a conscience years ago. He claimed his violence was just a brutal, necessary tool required to keep a messy world in line. It teaches us a haunting truth about humanity. Real monsters never look in the mirror and see a monster staring back. They only see a misunderstood savior building a better order. Without missing a beat, he quietly named 3 innocent people who were completely destroyed just for standing in his way. He listed the long months he spent cleaning up his bloody messes, speaking like a bored accountant reviewing a spreadsheet. He calmly pointed out one old mistake he genuinely wished he could erase, and 2 recent, terrible choices he would happily make all over again. Notice what is entirely missing from this chilling picture. He never once said he was sorry. Emma caught that red flag instantly in the dark. He laid out his violent sins with perfect clarity, proving he thought about the terrible damage he had done. Yet, he refused to offer the one thing a human heart truly craves: genuine remorse. He did not apologize, because a fractured mind like his simply cannot process guilt. The lesson here is absolutely vital. When someone finally shows you the cold, unfeeling machinery of their soul, you absolutely must believe them the first time. Let us sit in the quiet for a moment, you and I, and just watch her. A heavy chill fills the kitchen as Emma lets the horrifying reality of his life wash over her. She silently tests whether her heart can survive the frost radiating from the man she married. When asked about her stalker, James barely blinks. His guy handled it. "Just a friendly chat," he murmurs, his voice stripped of any warmth. He swears the stalker, moved by choice, but Emma hears his terrifyingly narrow definition of unharmed. "The man is still breathing," James whispers, unapologetic for the brutal violence hanging between them. The saddest truth we learn in the dark is this: the greatest danger of living among shadows is that you eventually learn to find comfort resting inside the monster's teeth. Watch the madness unfolding around them. Crane is losing his mind to pure greed, demanding a massive fortune after their violent split. Yet James acts like he is merely checking the weather, casually brushing off a ruthless mob boss. The silence in the room drops to 0. Emma sits there with her hands trembling, forcing herself to detach just to survive the shock of his coldness. Instead of breaking down over being hunted by a kingpin, she flips a switch deep inside her soul. She pulls on the heavy lawyer armor she spent 10 years forging, boxing up her terror like she is reviewing a stranger's legal brief. It brings us to a harsh truth about endurance. When the pain hits far too hard, sometimes the only way to keep breathing is to turn your mind into a frozen fortress and lock the agony out. You and I have seen this kind of underworld trap before, and Emma spots it from a mile away. Crane is going to send another hitman, thinking the wife is an easy target. It is a fatal mistake. She whispers that he does not know her at all, her voice sounding like crushed glass. James offers a dark, twisted smile, captivated by the fierce energy she radiates. She looks him dead in the eyes and snaps that she refuses to be a helpless pawn in his bloody game. If her life is the ultimate wager, she demands the raw truth tonight. James nods slowly, perfectly playing the devoted husband. But listen closely, because here is the ultimate lesson hiding in this chaos. A warden is never going to hand over the keys just because you asked nicely. If you truly want your freedom, you have to rip it right out of their hands. She is trembling, yet demands to hear him say the words out loud. James stares right into her soul and swears he is done pulling the strings. To normal folks, a promise from a ruthless kingpin is basically empty air. But Emma has been trapped in his toxic gravity for 7 months, twisting her morals just to survive this nightmare. She actually believes him, mostly because the devil rarely bothers to make genuine promises. Trusting the villain is sometimes the only way to catch a breath in the dark. She slowly gets up, leaves her glass by the sink, and turns her back. The crushing reality of her new life heavily drops onto her shoulders. It leaves us with a brutal truth. The worst part about being locked inside a gorgeous cage is that, sooner or later, you end up helping the jailer secure the door. The quiet devastation in that dark room is heavy. She turns back around in the dim light, and his untouchable boss mask is completely shattered. All that remains is an exhausted man who simply cannot keep up the ruthless act anymore. He whispers that there are things the contract never accounted for, and her breath hitches, her heart hammers against the agonizing silence. She asks him what he means, and he just gestures at the unspoken tension burning between them. We are watching two people fall completely off the script, terrified of the real feelings growing in the wreckage of their lies. It leaves us with a profound lesson to think about. Real, honest connection usually sparks at the exact second all those heavy walls we spend our lives building, finally, come crashing down to the earth. The scene shifts to her isolated bedroom. She tells him they need to handle Crane first, hiding behind the cold safety of tactical planning, instead of dealing with her swirling emotions. James agrees, pushing their massive emotional baggage off for another bloody day. Left all alone, she stares at the ceiling, trying to justify this hostage situation she calls a marriage. But then, the shadows shift. Her phone buzzes in the pitch black. One single, glowing text changes everything. It warns that her husband is not the biggest threat, urging her to ask about Catherine. Whoever sent this knows exactly how to wreck their fragile trust. It is a brutal lesson for all of us wandering in the dark. The worst, most fatal hits in life always come from the ghosts, who know where our armor is broken. The lens zooms in on her face, bathed in the haunting blue light of that anonymous text. Catherine. This name is a complete ghost, never mentioned once in 7 months of secrets and mob plotting. She flips the phone over, and the silence in that giant mansion suddenly feels suffocating. A weaker soul would have run down the hall, crying and demanding answers. But Emma does not shed a single tear, and she is definitely not going back to sleep. With this massive secret burning a hole in her mind, and a crime boss sleeping just 30 feet away, she starts silently setting up her own invisible trap. The lesson here is crucial for anyone backed into a corner. When the universe is actively trying to destroy you, sometimes you must become much colder and far sharper than the monsters lurking in your blind spot. Stick with me, because we are watching this psychological chess match unfold step by step. Picture the kitchen at dawn. The morning light is bleak, and Emma is sitting there, holding a freezing cup of coffee. She has been camping out in the shadows since 5. When James walks in at 6:15, the man freezes in his tracks. He locks up the second he spots the ruthless energy she is radiating. He notes that she did not sleep, his deep voice sounding completely wrecked. She fires right back that he did not either. His ruined collar and the dark shadows under his eyes prove he was fighting his own midnight demons. The truth hitting us right now is heavy. Keeping massive secrets does not just ruin the person you are deceiving. It slowly rots the soul of the person fighting to keep those secrets hidden. The room drops into a heavy silence when she slides the phone across the table. You can hear the glass scraping in the quiet. Emma goes into full tactical mode, hunting for every reaction on his tired face. She catches his jaw locking up, his dark eyes darting around the screen like a cornered animal. She asks who sent it, sounding like a judge reading a sentence. He sinks into his chair and whispers that he does not know, but she instantly snaps back that he definitely knows the name, gripping her mug until her knuckles turn white. She demands the truth about Catherine. His silence in that moment is not a lie. It is just a shattered man staring into the abyss of his dark past. It reminds us of a hard truth. Real connection never comes from being flawless. It comes from having the guts to drop your ugliest sins onto the table. Time drags in that shadowy kitchen. Emma is masterfully weaponizing the silence, pressing down just enough to break his defenses. Catherine Reeves, he whispers, and the name drops like an anvil. He admits they were involved 6 years ago, way before he walked away from the Mafia syndicate. Emma does not even blink. Her face is a stone wall. He looks at her with a melancholic sadness and drops the final twist. Catherine betrayed him. She snitched to a federal task force, and 3 of his top guys got locked away forever. Emma takes that hit without flinching. Catherine was an informant who cracked under the weight of his dark world. It hits home with a brutal lesson. Human loyalty is incredibly fragile. When absolute ruin is on the line, even the most intense romance will shatter into pure self-preservation. Listen to the utter defeat in his voice. When he confesses, he understands why she cracked. He explains the terrifying reality of witness relocation, swearing Catherine has been dead to his world for 6 years. As far as you knew, Emma fires back, shoving his guilt to the edge. The tension is thick as she drops the ultimate question. Does Victor Crane know about Catherine? Hearing the rival boss's name, James flinches. It is a raw reaction showing how deep that mob trauma runs in his veins. But the craziest part of this puzzle, the digital footprint of that midnight text does not match Crane's network. We have an unknown third player hiding in the dark. It shows us a terrifying truth about life. Escaping your past is a joke. Your history is always waiting right there in the shadows, ready to collect every single debt. Emma nails the logic, asking if this ghost is working for Crane, fighting him, or hunting James for revenge. You can see a look of awe flash across his exhausted face. He is relieved to finally have someone operating on his dangerous level. He is amazed. She mapped out this entire mafia nightmare overnight. She just replies coldly that she had the time, falling back on her old defensive conditioning. He gives a tiny, heartbroken smile before it vanishes into the morning light. It is a tragic moment in the middle of all this heavy trauma. Dragged painfully back to reality, James finally drops the darkest piece of lore. That federal task force was run by a man named Darren Cole. The lesson here is massive. A sharp mind is an amazing shield, but even the smartest people can get wrecked by the ghosts they never saw coming. Listen closely out there in the dark, because you and I are about to watch this fragile world shatter. The truth hits the room before James can even finish his thought. Cole walked away from the feds 3 whole years ago, and now he is cashing checks from Victor Crane. Crane's pride was so brutally crushed that he bought the one man holding the keys to James's entire violent history. Every buried sin, every quiet weakness. Emma sits there, freezing over, as the nightmare takes shape. Crane is not just stealing their peace. He is quietly nailing down the lid on their legal coffin. It leaves us with a cold truth tonight. The enemies that truly destroy you are never the ones screaming at your front door. They are the ones sitting in the silence, studying your blueprints. Let us look at the pieces scattered on the table tonight. Emma is unraveling at the seams, staring right down the barrel of her worst nightmare. She knows that if Catherine has returned, she is the government's ultimate weapon, a walking ghost perfectly designed to burn James's operation to ash. James just sits there in the heavy silence, looking completely drained of life. When Emma finally snaps, demanding to know who is pulling the strings in the shadows, James delivers a crushing blow. Catherine is moving on her own, either sending a quiet warning or coming to tear their crew apart. There is a harsh reality here to carry you with you. You never discover who your true friends are while the sun is warm. Real loyalty is only forged in the pitch black when everything falls to pieces. James stares back at Emma, his eyes heavy with the weight of a tragedy already written in stone. He tells her the bitter truth about Catherine. She is a pure survivor, a ghost who never steps out of the dark unless there is something for her to take. Emma absorbs that heavy blow without blinking and simply asks, "So what do we do next?" The moment that single word leaves her lips, James fractures. He suddenly realizes she is locking herself to his sinking ship. He tries to put up a cold front, begging her to run, to save herself from the wreckage he created. But Emma refuses his shelter, staring him down with absolute steel. Tonight's lesson is found right in that gaze. True love is not just a gentle touch. It is standing at the gates of hell and refusing to let them walk in alone. Emma completely shatters his tired, lone wolf routine. She reminds him they cemented this bond barely 6 hours ago, and since the shadows dragged her into the mud, she is not walking away. She looks him dead in the eye and tells him they are either walking this path together or she is burning it down alone. 4 agonizing seconds of dead air fill the room before James finally exhales, nodding his surrender. Then, Emma transforms into something terrifying. For 4 straight hours, she becomes a ghost in the machine, tearing through cold federal records and carving into Crane's empire to build a lethal trap. There is a simple wisdom here for anyone listening in the dark. When your world starts crumbling to pieces, the smartest, calmest move is to trust the raw skills you already hold in your hands. The midnight hours tick by, and when the screens finally flicker back to life, Emma has pulled up a ghost story so deep it is chilling. She has dug up secrets about Victor Crane that the man himself had probably buried in the back of his mind. James stares at the glowing monitors, utterly stunned by the cold precision of her work. He cannot fathom how she unearthed a lifetime of sins in just 4 hours. She simply replies that old scars never really fade. Then, James spots a shadow in the paperwork, a hollow shell company, built strictly to wash the blood off mafia money. He leans into the glow, asking if they can turn that very ghost into a weapon. Keep this in mind when the walls close in. In a brutal fight for your life, knowledge is not just an advantage, it is a loaded gun. You can feel the air in the room grow suffocatingly heavy. The sorrow drains out of James, replaced by the cold, calculated stare of the monster he was raised to be. The silence is deafening. Emma senses the storm brewing and quietly tells him to make the call. James takes a slow breath, locking his fear away in the dark, and dials the number. 2 painful rings echo out. Catherine answers, her voice hollow and dead, sounding like someone who has spent a decade sleeping with one hand on a trigger. She whispers that she was taking bets on how long his pride would hold out. It is a haunting reflection for the late night hour. When you spend all your years fighting to survive a nightmare, you often end up losing the very soul you were trying so desperately to protect. James fights to keep his voice completely flat, demanding to know why she pulled his innocent wife into this violent mess. Even through the dead calm, you can see the rage trembling in his jaw. Catherine replies with a voice made of pure winter ice, admitting she only stole the data to keep herself breathing. The silence that follows is heavy. Catherine has spent years watching Victor Crane play his twisted games, using buried secrets to ruin lives, and she refused to bleed for him. As Emma listens, trying to find the pulse beneath the words, Catherine delivers a heavy truth. She tells them, James is not the real villain hiding in the dark. Remember this when you judge others. The most honest truths about who is truly good or evil often come straight from the mouths of those living in hell. Catherine finally confesses that she owes James a deep psychological debt, and for a fraction of the ice in her voice fractures. But Emma ignores the bleeding heart routine, cutting straight to the bone. She asks what the ghost actually wants. Catherine's answer crashes into the room. She wants a permanent way out. After 6 years rotting in the empty shell of federal protection, she is demanding her life back. She wants Crane erased from the earth so she becomes completely useless to the feds, refusing to be pushed around a chessboard anymore. James freezes, entirely paralyzed by the sheer madness of her plan. It leaves a heavy truth hanging in the midnight air. Merely, breathing is never truly living if you have to sign away the ownership of your own soul just to survive. Just listen to the absolute cold-blooded mastery in her right here. Catherine does not blink as she demands blind faith from the very man whose family she locked away in federal cages. She is holding out Victor Crane's ruin on a silver platter, but the price of admission is absolute obedience. James falls completely silent, the walls closing in. He begs for 12 hours to arrange the pieces, but she ruthlessly slices his time down to 8. When the sun comes up, this steel trap snaps shut, and a single missed step means the grave. James slowly lowers the phone, staring at his empty hands in the dim light. There is a brutal reality to swallow here. Out in the cold, trust has nothing to do with goodness. It is simply a bloody currency you are forced to spend just to stay alive. Emma watches from the shadows, her eyes tracking every silent fracture of his breakdown. She can almost hear the gears grinding in his mind, feeling the raw agony of a man who realizes his entire bloodline is resting on the edge of a knife. She catches that subtle clench of his jaw. She knows exactly what it means in his world. He has already chosen to pull the trigger. He accepts the 8-hour ticking clock because Catherine is the only demon crazy enough to drag Crane to hell. Emma holds his gaze in the dim light and calmly asks what her role is. He looks back, warning her that stepping through this door is permanent. This teaches us something painful about life. To finally wake up and see reality, you must always be willing to sacrifice your innocence to the dark. Emma's voice is barely a whisper, yet it fills the room as she tells him her side in this war was chosen long ago. He tries to push her away, reminding her she was meant to handle the quiet paperwork, not catch a fatal bullet in the dark. But watch as the fear completely drains from her body. For 2 long years, she allowed her trauma to keep her chained, using legal briefs as a shield against the real world. Now, she looks into his tired eyes and declares she is entirely done hiding. She is marching straight into the fire by his side. You can practically hear James's heavy emotional armor hit the floor. Keep this lesson close to your chest. You will never truly heal while hiding behind comfortable little walls. Eventually, you have to step boldly back out into the freezing rain. James finally gives a slow, heavy nod, and the quiet study instantly transforms into a midnight war room. As the night stretches on, Marcus and 2 silent enforcers slip through the door like shadows. James falls right back into the rhythm of a brutal commander, while Emma becomes something entirely cold and calculated behind the glowing screens. Tearing through the encrypted noise, she pinpoints 3 hidden financial arteries. With just the right pressure, these seemingly harmless sheets of paper will form a razor-sharp guillotine for Crane's empire. The best part of it all? Catherine stays completely invisible. There is a deep lesson here about moving in the world. True power never has to scream. It simply breathes in the dark, sliding pieces into place until the fatal trap closes forever. Stay close to me now, because the poetry of this revenge is absolutely chilling. Emma lays out the fatal design. By erasing Catherine's value as a federal informant, they are going to starve Victor Crane of the very oxygen he needs to operate. He will have 0 reason to chase them, simply because Emma forged a brutal death trap out of boring public records resting quietly in the light of day. James watches her in silent awe, entirely stunned that she weaponized plain paper to cut a mobster's throat. Emma allows herself a faint smile, already dialing up the memory of a corrupt judge who owes her a blood debt. There is a beautiful piece of wisdom hidden in this revenge. Sometimes, the most devastating way to destroy a screaming monster is to simply make them completely irrelevant to your world. Let's look at this opening together, you and I, because the fallout is absolutely nuclear. Picture the scene. James points out that when the boss, Crane, finally goes down, he'll know James was hiding a ruthless secret weapon the entire time. Emma doesn't even blink. The dim light catches her icy stare as she whispers that it's actually good for him to know. Then, out of nowhere, the heavy silence completely shatters. For the first time in 7 months, James bursts out laughing. It's a raw, jagged sound that completely wrecks the dark tension in the room. He straight up admits she terrifies him, and she absorbs that as a massive compliment. Here's a simple lesson for tonight. There's nothing more powerful than showing your true colors to someone who stays anyway. The psychological warfare happening in this room is just on another level. James is moving pieces on the board with the cold precision of a man who thrives in the darkest corners of the underworld. Emma matches his rhythm perfectly, completely sealing off any legal escape route. Fast forward a few hours, and Victor Crane is locked up in federal chains. He's totally finished. Then, Mark steps into the doorway. His voice is flat, but if you look closely, you can see a tiny softening around his tired eyes. It's the release of a violent tension he's been carrying for literal years. Honestly, the takeaway here is pretty grounded. We often drag the heavy weight of our survival around for so long that we completely forget what it actually feels like to finally set that burden down. James sits across from her, just soaking in the sheer scale of their massive victory in total silence. Marcus chimes in from the shadows with the ultimate plot twist. Their inside man has flipped, running from the burning empire, and Catherine is entirely safe. The second the heavy door clicks shut, Emma freezes, like a statue. If you've ever been through absolute hell, you know this exact feeling. It's the moment the pure adrenaline that kept you breathing just evaporates into thin air. The physical crash is intense, leaving a bone-deep exhaustion you only get after walking through literal fire. But underneath all that, she's finally touching solid ground. The life lesson here is deep but real. The absolute peace a person searches for usually waits right on the ashes of their nightmares. We stay right here on James as he watches her breathe in the quiet dark. Emma whispers for him to speak, and this terrifying mafia boss quietly admits he has 0 words left. It is honestly a staggering moment of pure, heartbreaking vulnerability. He leans forward, and the tough guy mask is completely shattered on the floor. What's left is a bruised, authentic man crawling out from the wreckage of his own armor. Emma shoots back their strict contract has 0 clauses for this kind of intimacy. She just stares out at the cold city where she had to hide for so long. Here's the reality check for tonight. We can tell ourselves that safety can be perfectly engineered, but no contract on earth can protect a human heart from the absolute necessity of feeling something real. Stick with me here, because this is the exact second their entire universe flips. Emma turns from the window, standing like an absolute force of nature in the pale moonlight. She's completely done playing house. She demands an end to the fake distance, and those hollow, scheduled dinners they suffer through. Staring right into the eyes of this lethal enforcer, she straight up asks for the fire. James crosses the room and stops just 2 feet away, completely wrecking their carefully rehearsed safety protocols. His shoulders are rigid, and the silent tension is off the charts. The big lesson to remember tonight is that a life lived entirely on paper is just a dry run. If you ever want to feel something genuinely real, you must strike a match and let the illusion of safety burn to the ground. The focus is entirely on James now, and you can truly feel the heavy gravity of this crazy moment. He notes the massive shift in their dynamic with chilling precision, but Emma doesn't even flinch, casually reminding him she's a ruthless negotiator. Then, time basically stops. He raises his scarred hand and gently tucks a stray strand of hair behind her ear. That single, quiet touch absolutely destroys every wall she ever built. He whispers her old name, but she cuts him off instantly. She demands he call her Hawk, claiming her tragic past as her own weapon. James just lets out a soft, aching laugh in the dark. It brings up a harsh truth we all have to face eventually. The deepest kind of love cannot be drafted in a safe little contract. It only shows up when you let the terror in. The morning sun blasts through the blinds, and even though the boss Crane is finally locked away, the emotional aftermath is incredibly heavy. Emma is just staring blankly at her phone. 3 missed calls from Ryan Calloway. The sheer audacity of this guy, entirely unable to realize he's totally irrelevant now, is wild to witness. She doesn't shake, and she definitely doesn't cry. She just watches those notifications stack up on the screen, feeling absolutely nothing but cold space where her panic used to live. It's a massive flex, honestly. It leads to a really powerful, undeniable revelation about how healing actually works. True closure isn't some dramatic explosion of anger or bitter revenge. It happens the second you look directly at the ghost who haunted you, and you feel nothing. She hits play, letting the harsh audio fill the quiet room. That first voicemail is a pathetic attempt to sound casual. Gone, deleted instantly. The second one is dripping with fake concern, digging blindly for dirt on James. Deleted again. But the third one? That's where the ugly mask completely falls off. Ryan's voice echoes with the frantic entitlement of a guy who refuses to accept he's been replaced. He tries to act tough, repeating those tired old lines about how she deserves more. Emma just stands there, totally unbothered, recognizing the sad flailing of a manipulator losing his grip. Listen closely, because this is a lesson written in stone. You owe absolutely nothing, to the toxic shadows of your past. They only come knocking to see if the chains they put on you are still tight. The scene cuts hard to the ultimate power move. Emma blocks Ryan's number, permanently burning the bridge to her painful old life. Real survival means utterly cutting off anyone who only knew the weak version of you. She heads downstairs and stops dead in her tracks. James is leaning on the counter with 2 mugs of black coffee. You and I can clearly see the massive shift here. He's quietly claiming his space in her broken world. Emma rolls with it, taking the warm mug and casually dropping the bomb about Ryan's calls. James slowly turns, one eyebrow creeping up, and locks eyes with her in this terrifying, unblinking calm. The lesson tonight is simple but incredibly heavy. When you step into your true power, you have to let the people who truly respect your strength share your space. She shreds Ryan's pathetic strategy without even blinking. She knows he saw the boss go down and foolishly thought he could swoop in as the conquering hero. Emma sips her dark coffee, totally accepting this silent, heavy partnership James is offering. When she tells him the number is permanently blocked, she's setting a brand new rule. From now on, it's absolute, brutal honesty between them. A tiny, dangerous smirk crosses James's face, showing he's genuinely impressed by her cold fire. But the romance is instantly killed by harsh reality when Emma demands the battle plan. James leans in close, dropping his voice low. The feds are moving on Crane, and the real bloodbath is just beginning. Look, here's the truth. A real partnership is about standing back to back when the war starts. The tension inside this room is thick enough to cut with a knife. James predicts the warrants will explode into a massive federal nightmare within 30 days. He leans against the cold counter, staring right into her eyes, and flat out admits his own neck is on the chopping block. Emma doesn't flinch for a second. She spent the entire night mapping out this exact disaster in her head. She just looks right back at him and asks how bad the bleeding really is. He says it's manageable, but only if they have a totally ruthless lawyer. The silence that drops next is truly epic. She completely shatters their old fake identities by casually dropping her past as a high-stakes financial litigator onto the table. It proves a massive point about human nature. Shared survival breeds the deepest intimacy. She grabs that fake title of a helpless wife and turns it into a fully loaded weapon, pointing it straight at his defenses. James tries to throw up some legal walls about spousal privilege, but Emma completely wrecks him in half a second. Her voice is dead calm, sounding exactly like a hungry predator who finally feels at home in the dark. She isn't just asking to file his paperwork. She's demanding a permanent seat at the Mafia War Council. No more hiding in the quiet background. James sets his coffee down, and the click echoes like a heavy gunshot. He completely drops his tough guy act, giving her the raw, unspoken respect a man only gives his true equal. The lesson here is explosive. Stepping into your true power means forcing people to see exactly how incredibly dangerous you really are. Pull up a chair and let us look at this piece by piece. We are witnessing a man who finally surrenders. James does not fight her. He just nods, shadows heavy under his eyes, and tells Emma to get his top lawyer on the line. Emma refuses to sit on the sidelines anymore. For 90 grueling minutes, they tear through the files. She is right. James is bleeding out from 2 massive financial traps. The only way out is the paper trail Emma built, while the rest of the world slept. Enter Jillian Park, a legal shark with ice in her veins. She listens to Emma dismantle the trap in pure silence. When Emma names her old cutthroat firm, Jillian's icy mask shatters into pure respect. In a world full of loudmouths, being absolutely undeniable at what you do is the only thing that keeps you breathing. Jillian demands to know where this mastermind came from. Emma credits her raw grit, then casually names the ruthless judge who taught her the dark arts of the courtroom. Over the speaker, you can hear Jillian physically choke on her breath. Emma smoothly roasts the judge for his massive ego, and James actually bites his lip to hold back a laugh. The tension breaks. Jillian promises to handle the filings, mutters a rare thank you, and hangs up. The room falls dead quiet. James whispers that his shark attorney has never thanked a single soul before. Emma sets her pen down, stares right through his defenses, and says he should have unleashed her from day one. You have to step up and own your unique power, because if you hide from who you are, the world will eat you alive. The atmosphere in the room abruptly shifts into something cold and heavy. James absorbs the hit in total silence. It is a rare thing to watch a powerful man own his fatal mistake without a single excuse. He softly promises to update his files. These two are sitting there, sipping lukewarm coffee, plotting against federal prosecutors like it is a lazy Sunday. The human mind is strange. It will build a cozy campfire inside a burning house just to feel safe. But hours later, that fragile illusion shatters. Emma is buried in paperwork when Marcus fills the doorway. His posture is rigid. The real war has finally arrived. Never get too comfortable in the chaos. A moment of peace is usually just the quiet before an absolute bloodbath. Marcus steps further into the room, his voice tight and rattled. He drops the bomb. Catherine Reeves has been found. Emma shoots up from her desk, her pulse hammering against her ribs. She demands to know who breached their security, bracing herself for a full assault. But Marcus raises a heavy hand to calm the room. Catherine is not dodging assassins right now. She is waiting downstairs, and she specifically asked for Emma. The air grows suffocating. James is locked away in his office, completely unaware of this shift. Emma realizes she is about to face the living ghost of his darkest chapters. This proves a harsh reality. You can run as fast as you want, but eventually, you have to stand your ground and fight the ghosts you spend your whole life trying to escape. Emma claims her authority, the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders. She orders Marcus to keep James in the dark. She needs 10 uninterrupted minutes with this phantom. Marcus hesitates, a flash of pure terror in his eyes, before he finally nods. Emma walks down the long hallway, the silence pressing against her chest. She pushes open the thick oak doors, and there she is, Catherine. She sits dead center in the massive room, looking incredibly fragile. Her spine is locked, eyes darting like a trapped animal waiting for the final blow. The manipulation is gone. She is just a broken soul who forgot how to breathe. It is a tragic sight, leaving us with a brutal truth. Living in constant fear does not build your character. It slowly hollows you out until nothing is left. Come with me into the cold lighting of this room. Emma skips the polite introductions, claiming the space the second she walks in. Catherine sits trembling, admitting she ditched her handler just to buy 40 minutes of privacy. When Emma coldly asks why, Catherine sounds utterly shattered. She calls Emma the anomaly, the wild card that ruined all their careful calculations. She confesses her massive blunder. She thought Emma was just a soft civilian, some fragile pawn. James kept locked away for comfort. Instead, Emma obliterated a syndicate threat in mere hours, using financial records that veteran killers ignored. Let this be a warning to anyone listening tonight. Judging someone by their quiet, calm exterior is the absolute fastest way to invite your own destruction. Catherine speaks with a voice that sounds dead inside. She flatly states that Emma is no normal civilian. Emma takes the heavy compliment without a single flinch. Under the polished wood table, Catherine nervously wrings her trembling hands. It is the frantic energy of a mastermind who has forgotten how to be vulnerable. She admits she had to see the woman James chose after surviving 6 years of pure hell. Staring at Emma with hollow eyes, Catherine whispers that he chose perfectly. The silence stretches out, heavy enough to crush your lungs. Emma quietly studies this broken woman, a ghost who once meant everything to a dangerous man. It brings up a harsh reality. True mental toughness is not about dodging the damage. It is about how you carry your shattered pieces afterward. A quiet wave of empathy washes over Emma. She realizes Catherine is no longer the villain of this story. She is just tragic collateral damage from a brutal, unforgiving war. With steady authority, Emma offers her a rare absolution. She looks right at her and says she is completely free. Catherine clenches her jaw, her mind short-circuiting as she tries to process a pardon she thought was impossible. Then, The temperature in the room drops. James materializes in the doorway. His dark eyes scan the room, and 6 years of bloody history crash over his face. But he does not rage. He just silently buries that dead timeline right there. Real peace only starts the second we stop wrestling with our past demons. Emma softly calls his name, anchoring him back to the present moment. Emma controls the volatile energy in the room, her voice steady as she tells James they were just finishing. The silent conversation flashing between their eyes is heavy. With one steady look, she tells him she is handling his worst nightmare. He accepts her lead, leaning against the doorframe without making a single sound. Slowly, Catherine stands up. She looks at James with the empty stare of someone who survived the war but lost her soul. She forces out a broken apology, knowing full well that words cannot fix a ledger painted in blood. James gives her nothing. He remains chillingly silent, staring right through her as if she is already gone. It is a tough pill to swallow. You do not always need to grant your explicit forgiveness to finally start healing from a massive betrayal. You and I are going to watch this final exit together, because there is no grand forgiveness here. In this dark underworld, a forced apology is nothing but emotional surrender. Instead, we witness an incredibly raw moment of closure. They just nod at each other, two battered survivors, recognizing the exact same trauma. Catherine quietly mutters that James is a notoriously difficult man. Emma agrees without missing a beat. For a split second, Catherine's frozen expression twitches into a deeply sad, tiny smile. She gathers her coat and ghosts into the hallway. The room instantly flatlines back into a heavy, suffocating silence. Here is the brutal truth of the real world. Surviving a toxic situation almost never ends with a warm hug. It usually ends with the quiet click of a heavy door. Notice the quiet shift in James now that they are alone. He softly tells Emma that he handled the situation using the exact same cold phrasing from months ago. But his tone carries a different weight. This is no longer a ruthless boss moving pieces on a board. His raspy voice gives away the pure shock of a lonely man realizing he found someone who truly sees him. He asks her to step closer. She moves in, and he meets her halfway in the center of the dark room. That distance mirrors their new dynamic. They are equals now. His hand trembles slightly as he reaches out to cup her face, desperately needing to ground himself in her reality. Here is the final lesson for tonight. Even the most titanium-plated emotional walls will crumble when you find authentic human connection. James steps out of the shadows, shedding the armor of a ruthless boss to spill his buried truth. He confesses the real reason he bought out her crushing debt. The cold excuse of asset protection was a desperate shield to mask his consuming devotion. His voice drops to a heavy whisper, admitting his heart was compromised long before she ever stepped into that freezing room. Emma stands paralyzed, the weight of his words stealing her breath. He remembers the heavy thud of the contract she slammed onto his desk. She did not arrive weeping for mercy. She marched in with the precision of a warrior demanding survival. Never forget this truth. When the world works in the dark to break you, the absolute sharpest weapon you will ever carry is an educated, unyielding mind. Listen closely to the heavy silence of this moment, because the emotional gravity here is absolutely crushing. James realizes she walked into that bitter negotiation, long ago fully prepared to lose everything. Holding her gaze, he drops a confession that shatters the room. This was never just business. His deep voice fractures into a quiet ache, revealing she was his first taste of real life after 20 years of hollow survival. Emma steadies her breathing, choosing to stand in the fire of this raw emotion instead of retreating. He forged a heart of ice so no rival could weaponize his pain. But here is the beautiful tragedy of it all. Shutting off your soul completely is an impossible task. Even the most ruthless king eventually has to surrender his crown when true love walks through the door. The true brilliance of this midnight hour is the total absence of violence. We watch Emma navigate his fractured soul with quiet grace. She does not tear down the heavy steel walls around his heart, She simply stands there, radiating fierce authenticity, letting her warmth slowly melt his armor. Watch the way her throat tightens, swallowing a sob to force her mind to override the deep trauma. Tears are a luxury of survival, and she refuses to waste them. With calm, steady eyes, she dictates a new world, demanding an equal partnership with zero emotional shadows. It is a breathtaking display of strength. Real power is never about screaming the loudest in a crowded room. It is about having the quiet, unwavering courage to finally take the wheel of your own destiny. Emma lays down the rules of their new life, demanding total honesty about any rising threats in the shadows. She swears if he ever watches her from the dark again, she will build a legal cage so suffocating that even corrupt mob lawyers will choke on it. James absorbs the full weight of her fiery menace. Then, a beautifully genuine laugh tears out of his chest. His suffocating paranoia shatters into pure, unfiltered joy. That warm sound washes over Emma, like the first rays of dawn after months of living as a hunted ghost. She closes her eyes, finally letting herself lean into his solid embrace. Never forget this profound truth. I crossed the street. The most beautiful rewards and the deepest connections in this life are always waiting patiently on the other side of terrifying vulnerability. A few quiet weeks drift by, revealing the gritty reality of their fragile new chapter. Balancing her clean legal world with his dark underworld ties is a walk on a razor wire. But a profound shift takes root. James operates with terrifying calm, dismantling rival empires in the shadows and only sharing the quiet aftermath. When word arrives that Ryan fled the city, she dismisses it like yesterday's rain. Later, Daniel arrives for dinner. He paces the floor, radiating the frantic energy of a street soldiers trying to breathe in a quiet room. It is a haunting image that teaches us a painful reality. For those who have spent their existence bleeding in the dark trenches, putting your heavy weapons down to finally accept a gentle peace is often the most terrifying thing you will ever do. James breaks the ice by tearing into Daniel for his late arrival. It is a calculated respect, finally washing away the toxic venom that nearly destroyed them both. Emma listens to them argue over sports trivia, recognizing this rough banter for what it really is, two battered men learning to exhale without drawing blades. She guards this mundane dinner like a priceless treasure. Weeks later, an unmarked postcard from Catherine slides under the door. 4 simple words of gratitude, whispering that even a shattered soul can slowly find the light. Emma rests it gently on her windowsill. It is a heavy reminder for the weary heart. No matter how violently your world is torn apart, you can always rewrite your ending if you just give yourself the quiet grace to heal. 4 months drift away like smoke. Emma stands bathed in the afternoon light, staring at her steady hands. It is proof that she is finally the author of her own fate. After years of being a helpless pawn, she feels the shift in the air as James steps into the room. In the bitter past, his shadow would have triggered her deepest survival instincts. Now the low thud of his boots is a comforting sound. He stops beside her, their shoulders brushing in the stillness. The glacial wall that once divided them is gone. This beautifully mundane peace is what actual healing looks like when the sirens finally stop ringing in your head. Understand this truth. True safety is not just the absence of monsters. It is finding that one soul who lets you completely drop your heavy shield. They pass a warm mug between them in total silence. Words are unnecessary now. He leans against the window, the dying light washing over his scarred face, and murmurs that the nightmare is finally over. The last traps have snapped shut on their enemies. By the time the snow melts, the ghosts of their past will be erased. They exchange a heavy look that holds years of unspoken grief. Outside the glass, the city continues its violent spin. But inside these walls, the air is thick with bulletproof serenity. You and I both know how rare it is to find a genuine sanctuary in this harsh world. They built a fortress out of shared silence and broken pieces, proving a vital lesson. The ultimate victory in life is finding the one person who lets you lay your heavy weapons in the dust. Focus pulls tight on Emma, a woman who has finally conquered her haunted mind. When James softly asks what she is thinking, dark flashbacks briefly flicker across her face. She remembers the suffocating galas, living as a terrified prey animal running from the slaughter. But the moment her gaze anchors onto James, the rigid tension in her spine melts. She has deciphered the hardest truth of all, forging massive steel walls around. Your heart will keep the monsters at bay, but it will leave you freezing to death in the dark, taking the terrifying risk of letting someone witness your ruined pieces is the only way to truly live. She draws a slow breath, looks into his eyes, and declares she is ready for the elite art gallery next week. The era of hiding in the shadows is closed forever. James questions why she would step back into the viper's nest. Emma cuts through the old survival instincts. She wants to walk into a crowded room on the arm of the man she loves, simply to prove they survived the fire together. Violent tension in his jaw instantly evaporates. A rare, unguarded softness washes over his features as he slowly nods. The scene cuts to the blinding lights of the gallery, the soil where her enemies once tried to bury her alive. Tonight, draped in a deep burgundy dress, she owns the oxygen in the room. James is a silent anchor by her side. His steady touch is not for show. It is a fierce, unspoken vow. The lesson is carved in stone. True loyalty is not just bleeding together in the dark. It is standing shoulder to shoulder when the blinding lights finally turn on. Emma drifts through high society, carrying herself with the grace of a queen who no longer needs a shield. She is miles away from that trembling girl who used to hug the walls. The elites whisper, fixing her with cold stares, trying to comprehend how she survived their slaughter. But their toxic energy bounces off her skin. The fragile target they thought they broke is gone, replaced by a woman who is thoroughly untouchable. You and I have probably wasted years trying to polish our image before facing a cruel world. As the shot lingers on the beautiful smirk playing on her lips, the final truth hits hard. Absolute power is never about hiding your ugly battle damage. It is about picking up the bloody, broken shards of your past and refusing to ever apologize for surviving.
The deepest lesson from Emma and James' journey is that real partnership begins when both people stop standing at the edge of each other's lives. At first, James protects Emma from a distance, while Emma herself please emotionally separate through contracts and kill bounty. Both are trying to avoid pain. James avoids vulnerability by managing everything silently. Emma avoids vulnerability by limiting what she allows herself to feel. But when Victor Crane becomes a real threat and Catherine S. past resurfaces, their relationship changes. Emma tells James that she is done living at the edge of her own life. That sentence is the heart of the story. It means she no longer wants to be a protected figure in the background. She wants to participate, decide, and stand beside him, full awareness of the risks. James also changes. He stops treating Emma as someone to shield and begins treating her as someone capable of helping him. Their strongest moment is not a dramatic kiss or public display. It is the moment they work together. James with his knowledge of danger, Emma with her legal mind, both choosing honesty over control. This teaches a mature education lesson about love and leadership. A true partner is not on someone you hide the hard parts from. A true partner is someone you trust enough to face the hard parts with you. A partnership requires truth, respect, shared responsibility, and the courage to let the other person see the whole road. Emma S.'s final choice of the real thing shows that love becomes meaningful only when it is chosen freely, not protected by distance or defined only by documents.